But if there is an eruption, we will be the ones who will be making the sacrifices, entail the costs, and suffer the consequences. They would strike on their own without giving us much of an advance warning, maybe just as the operation begins. And its primary strategic objective would not be the achievement of the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities, but the objective would be to precipitate an Iranian reaction against us, because our complicity would be apparent to the Iranians. So their reaction will be directed against us. We would be the obvious target. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz and Bahrain and Iraq and Afghanistan and the price of oil and the condition of the global economy comes into play. There's a tendency to look at it from both sides, the Palestinian and the Israeli, from the short-range perspective. What both sides forget is that if there is no peace, it means a horrible fate for the Palestinians in the near future, an extremely dangerous fate for Israel in the longer run.
本期视频是一段地缘政治大师布热津斯基10几年前的神预言。现在回过头来看，不得不说，大师真的就是大师，全中啊！来介绍一下背景，主持人叫 Charlie Rose， 美国老牌的访谈宗师，采访过从克林顿到普京几乎所有的顶级人物。我们的主人公是美国冷战时期最顶级的战略大师布热津斯基，他是卡特总统时期的国家安全顾问，也是美国后冷战时期遏制苏联的战略核心操盘手。他写的那本鼎鼎大名的大棋盘，预言了美国后冷战时代所有的战略盲点。这段访谈发生在2012年奥巴马时期，当时的世界正处于一个十字路口，伊朗核危机一触即发，美国深陷伊拉克和阿富汗的泥潭，而阿拉伯之春的风暴眼正在形成，可以说局势真的极其复杂。在这一段12年前的访谈里，布热津斯基不仅复盘了美国过去20年的战略失误，而且他几乎是用一种临终预警的口吻，把美国中东政策的死穴一个个点破。但最讽刺的是，他当年提醒的这些陷阱，美国不仅一个都没有避开，而且是以近乎完美的方式，一步步走进了他当年预言的那个最差的剧本。布热津斯基在2012年发出的核心警告，不要对伊朗发动预防性战争，至少是阻止美国犯下比伊拉克更致命的错误。因为伊朗不是伊拉克，它有能力真正瘫痪全球经济，有能力点燃整个中东。一旦开战，美国将承担的代价不是又一场战争，而是全球霸权正式终结。让我们把时间倒回到那段访谈，来看一看一个真正的战略家如何用全局视野碾压短期的政治算计，如何在12年前就预言了今天的世界格局。
There's been lots of conversation about what might be taking place between Iran and the United States, whether it's threats to bomb the Straits of Hormuz or to close it, or whether it's some exchange of letters. Tell me what you think might be going on there.
I think all of that is going on, in fact. There are threats, there are concerns, and there are divisions within the Israeli government, within the Iranian government, within the US government. That is to say, divisions in our government, not of principle, but of uncertainty, how to play it. In effect, things are coming to a head, and I think we have to take a deep breath. And while I think we're engaged in the right course of trying to somehow or other redress the problem posed by Iran, we have to be very careful not to create a situation in which the Iranians feel they're being destroyed by the sanctions, and they lash out and start a conflict.
And you just had the European Union states say that they will enforce all sanctions.
That's right. Now the question is, how far does one go in these sanctions? Because if, in effect, a country is about to be destroyed economically, it first of all unites the people with the government. The people, generally speaking, don't react against the government until there is a defeat. Till then, they feel the other side is at fault. So we run the risk, in any case, of uniting the Iranians, the people, with the government.
Does sanctions have the power to force them, to compel them to do something and change their behavior on the nuclear issue?
That depends a great deal on how we pose that issue. Because if the issue is posed in a way in which they have to, in effect, abjectly capitulate, then I think a great many of them will say no. This is a country of 80 million people. And they know that while we can inflict enormous damage on them, they can hurt us a lot. Charlie, we have been now in 2 10-year-long wars. We have wasted an enormous amount of financial wealth, not to speak of lives. Our position in the world has deteriorated. Can you imagine what the consequences would be for us if the conflict in Afghanistan expanded because of the Iranians, if Iraq was massively destabilized, if Bahrain was set on fire, if the northeastern oil fields in Saudi Arabia were attacked?
Do they have the capacity to ignite all of that?
To ignite, yes. To prevail, no. But in the meantime, the consequences, the costs, would be cumulative.
And oil prices would go through the roof.
Yes, and the global economy will be affected. So we're playing with fire here. I understand our commitment of dealing resolutely with this problem. I'm a little baffled why we're pushing the envelope so hard, because after all, we have been willing to live with North Korea, which demonstrably poses a similar problem for South Korea and for Japan. Yet we're not making such a fuss. We have been able to deter the Soviet Union, which was much more lethal than Iran can ever be in the foreseeable future. We deterred the Chinese, even though Mao Zedong said that a nuclear war would mean 300 million people dead. So what? You know, we have to take a deep breath and ask ourselves, look, if worst comes to worst, and even if they do move towards having some capacity in the nuclear weapons area, we can still deter them. We can certainly destroy them.
Is it your opinion they only want capacity, they don't want necessarily to produce weapons?
I think it's open, and I suspect they're positioning themselves to be a little bit like Japan.
Exactly.
That is to say, have the potential capacity, but not to exercise it. Well, in that context, is that worse than a war, or is it less lethal than a war?
Some people say the worst outcome is not that they would use the nuclear weapon against Israel or anyone else. The possibility that it is a land in which the nuclear weapon, if it was made, could be stolen.
They have to be handled with TLC, tender loving care. Because if you don't know how to use them, if you don't know how to adjust them, if you don't revitalize them periodically, and I'm using layman's language deliberately, they become either useless or dangerous to the people who are playing with them.
Does that include our own stockpile?
Certainly. That's why we do all sorts of things to it periodically, to keep it, so to speak, ready and refreshed and reliable and all that. The notion that the Iranians, after spending years and years of capital and effort and making major sacrifices from their standpoint, would give it to Hezbollah or to Hamas is laughable.
Okay. Now, I don't think they would do that because it would rain down on them rather than Hezbollah, because you can't find Hezbollah there in Lebanon and other places.
And they can be traced. You know, nuclear forensics now enable us to more or less tell if there is an explosion. What was the point of origin?
But so therefore you dismiss the idea that they're likely to be stolen, number one. And you also seem to accept the idea that a nuclear Iran can be contained as a nuclear North Korea has been contained, as the Soviet Union was contained.
Yes, I do.
So therefore it's okay with you if they achieve nuclear capability.
No, it's not okay.
I don't find a better way.
No, it's not okay because there are negatives. First of all, it creates instability. It heightens a sense of insecurity in Israel. It propitiates nuclear proliferation because some of the Arab states may want nuclear weapons. So it creates an international problem. But it's an international problem which I think has to be addressed with a sense of delicacy and responsibility, patience, and determination. And we have the power to deter. We have the power to destroy them if need be. But we don't need to rush headlong into a confrontation, which I fear will not erupt because someone starts it deliberately. Not even the Israelis, but is more likely to erupt because there will be such a level of fear and insecurity on both sides that some incidents or mistakes will precipitate an explosion.
But the argument also goes that as long as there is delay and delay and delay, for whatever reason, in getting the problem solved, they're closer to the success that they want.
Conceivably, but then you have to ask yourself, is containing them preferable to starting a war in which we, the United States, will be the principal payers of costs? It's not an accident that Russia is not anxious to get involved, not for that matter the Chinese. They have been looking at us over the last 20 years, watching us shooting ourselves in the foot, declining as a major power, waging wars which we are not prepared to win or capable of winning, or in which we set too highest goal. And are we going to compound these errors? Why?
So what would you do?
I would do more or less what we have been doing,
Sanctions?
but with a sense of
And sanctions on oil?
No, I wouldn't force it to the point in which the choice for them is capitulation or collision. And if we're going to bring them to their knees, I think we're going to precipitate an explosion.
Is there any doubt in your mind that they want a nuclear capability?
I think they want to have a potential capability. They also want to have status. They live in a part of the world in which, to the left of them, the Pakistanis have weapons. To the right of them, the Israelis have weapons. And there is an interesting problem also with the Pakistanis and Israelis. There's an interesting problem with the Israeli nuclear weapons. The Israelis have them, presumably, to defend themselves, right? Including against the Iranians, right?
Right.
Okay, now it seems that the Israelis feel that their nuclear deterrent doesn't deter the Iranians, right? And then maybe they should offer to give it up if the Iranians give theirs up. If it's useless, why have it? And I'm posing this essentially as an argument because I know it won't be taken seriously.
Right.
But the point is that we're dealing here with a volatile problem which involves a series of countries. But if there is an eruption, we will be the ones who will be making the sacrifices, entail the costs, and suffer the consequences.
Is it likely the Israelis would strike, in your judgment, even though Ehud Barak said it was not imminent, it was a long way off? And if they made that decision, would they inform the United States? What would they do?
My guess is if they were going to strike, they would strike on their own without giving us much of an advance warning, maybe just as the operation begins. And its primary strategic objective would not be the achievement of the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities, because they know they cannot do that effectively. But the objective would be to precipitate an Iranian reaction against us, because our complicity would be apparent to the Iranians in the sense that we didn't do anything to prevent it from happening, and that we, in fact, armed the Israelis so that they could do it. So their reaction would be directed against us. We would be the obvious target. And this is where the Strait of Hormuz and Bahrain and Iraq and Afghanistan and the price of oil and the condition of the global economy comes into play.
You think anything is going on with respect to the Israelis and the Palestinians? You see the effort on the part of the Palestinians to talk to the other part. Fatah talks to Hamas. You think there's any possibility that somehow they may speak with one voice and therefore be able to negotiate with the Israelis?
I have been dealing with this problem for 30 years, and I have a very simple conclusion based on my experience. And it's not a condemnation of one or the other. The fact of the matter is, in my judgment, that left to their own resources, the Israelis and the Palestinians will never reach a fair settlement, one that they can both live with. The publics on both sides are predisposed to some sort of a fair settlement, but there's these obstacles and these differences of what is fair.
Faction within faction in each state.
The bottom line is the Palestinians are too weak to make serious compromises as the beginning of the negotiating process. The Israelis are too strong and also too interested in having more land to make the initial compromises. It takes a third party to promote a settlement. There's only one party that can do that. That's the United States.
Which brings me to my next question before we turn to the book. How do you assess the stewardship in foreign policy of President Obama?
If I were to assess it abstractly, I could raise some objections. If I were to assess it in comparison to the alternatives that I see and hear every week, I think he's doing much better than any of the alternatives.
Fair enough. I hear that. But let's treat it in isolation as to what might have been. Okay.
Well, I think what might have been is, after his speeches in Istanbul, in Cairo, after his commitment to getting the peace, he might have chosen to go even on a historic and heroic visit to Jerusalem, made one more speech, and then really put the pressure on both the Palestinians and the Israelis to compromise. I think he positioned himself as moving towards peace. He even said the construction of the settlements ought to be stopped. When Netanyahu defied him, he got away with it. When the U.S. Congress began to pile in on Obama, not to mention all of the other problems that he was facing, the financial, the economic, and all of that, he decided to postpone it, which means he lost momentum, because he had most momentum the first year, and he lost some credibility. It's still regainable for the sake of the people involved, because in all of this discussion, there's a tendency to look at it from both sides, the Palestinian and the Israeli, from the short-range perspective. What do we get? What do we extract from the other? How do we position ourselves? What both sides forget is that if there is no peace, it means a horrible fate for the Palestinians in the near future, an extremely dangerous fate for Israel in the longer run, as American power recedes from the Middle East. Because what we have to observe is the fact that we were paramount in the Middle East after World War II, and we stayed paramount until recently. At one point, we had good relations with the key players in the Middle East: Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Look where we're now. We don't have particularly good relations with Iran, which we have just talked about. The Saudis are kind of uneasy about, especially because of Mubarak and Egypt.
Yeah, but they seem to have come back strong, it seems to me, a little bit.
They've come back with a sense of hesitation and reservation.
Right, exactly.
They don't trust us anymore. They don't rely on us. And the Egyptians are in a very unpredictable phase. So the whole structure of power in the Middle East is changing, and none of it is changing to our advantage.
And who becomes the key player?
Whoever dominates. And that could be very messy. Or whoever solicits new friends. That could, over time, even be China. Or in the shorter run, Pakistanis or Indians providing, for example, troops for hire to some of the countries.
The president has been on record as saying, when asked this sort of proverbial question, what do you worry about? What causes you to lose sleep at night? He says, Pakistan.
Well, that's very worrisome. And that, of course, is an extension of the Afghan problem. And it's a problem which is going to confront that region even after we are gone. And my point, and I make that in the book, is it's not in our interest to be the sole Western power deeply involved up to our neck in that region of the world.
Well, the president's trying to shift that focus,
exactly,
as you know.
And I hope we get out.
Get out meaning what? But clearly,
out of Afghanistan.
Do you doubt that we will get out of Afghanistan? Do you doubt that the president kept his commitment to get out of Iraq?
This was a very short-handed statement. I hope we get out in a manner that's acceptable. That is to say that something stays after we leave, but that can carry on its own, but with external support from us. Because when the Soviets were driven out, we all turned our backs on Afghanistan. And then Taliban filled the void. That mistake must not be repeated. You were
you were against the Iraq War, but you were in favor of a retaliation against Afghanistan because al-Qaeda originated there.
That's right, but both in public, in terms of an op-eds in, I think it was the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and also in the personal communication with Rumsfeld, I said, look, let's go in, clean up al-Qaeda if we can, knock out Taliban, and leave. Give them economic assistance and so forth, but not get engaged in any sort of longer war to create democracy in Afghanistan.
Are you suggesting that Rumsfeld may have consulted you with respect to Iraq?
No,
and said, no, Dr. Brzezinski wouldn't?
Not Iran, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. He did.
We're talking about it. Well, yes, there was a number of us. I mean, I wasn't the only one. Some former national security advisors were called in, and we had some discussions, and I have no illusion that we had much influence.
But you have suggested.
But we opined. You know, to affect policy, you have to be there day in, day out. You have to participate in the debates. You have to review the options. You have to discuss with the president and his advisors their views. It's a totally different process than being called in for a meeting or for lunch or something like that.
I'm going to take a tangent here for 1 second. Every president complains about the bubble. Does every president have all the information that they should have in making crucial decisions?
You know, I think on the basis of my now fairly extensive experience, I think basically the information they have, I'm not sure if they're sufficiently open to really sustained discussion of alternative perspectives. That's sometimes
sustained might be the key word.
Yes, because, you know, being called in once in a while, okay. But unless there is some sort of a dialogue in which the presidents really go out of the immediate circle, which after a while defines itself and whose individual positions are well known in advance, so either they're listened to or they're discounted. I think that is very difficult for a president to do, because for one thing, if you're called in by the president and you're not experienced, you tend to be deferential. You don't disagree with him directly. So the president has to be willing to spend some time listening to things he doesn't like to hear, or with which he a priori doesn't agree.
And that depends on your own confidence in yourself, I assume.
Right, and his style.
Whether it's a president or whether it's a vice president, or a secretary of state.
That's right. I did it because I do think that by and large, we as a country don't recognize the extent to which the nature of global power is now changing. And I've been working and thinking about this phenomenon of global political awakening for a number of years. And that is transforming the nature of politics in our age.
Tell us what you mean by that. Arab Spring and what else?
It means very simply that for the first time in all of human history, almost all of humanity is politically conscious, politically awake, politically striving, politically restless, politically frustrated. That's new. We have been dealing throughout history until the French Revolution with essentially pliant populations who were not interested or involved in the political process. In the last 200 years, this spread. The two world wars were accelerators, and something else, very much so, maybe even more so. Radio, television, internet. And today we're interwoven, interactive, striving, resentful, and now we are in a world in which there's a growing narrative, widespread, that blames the West for many of the
Well, but wait a minute.
unhappiness.
I don't think that's true.
Why not?
Arab Spring was not blaming the West. That was a global awakening. It was about universal values. It was about dignity. It was about the demand for participation. It was not anti-Western. It was not anti-Israeli.
You're talking about purpose. I'm talking about historical narrative. Purpose, yes. Purpose was local. It was focused on local grievances, resentments, corruption, inequality, unemployment.
And you don't think it's changed since the Obama administration came in, which the president tried to readdress, and he spoke to the aspirations of people, and he went to Cairo, as you said?
Yeah, it started changing. It started changing. But then there's been sort of a set sense of some letdown and feeling, well, maybe elements of continuity in America are more important than the new sense of innovation.
But take this. Some people's fears about Iraq are beginning to look like they're going to happen, that there will be some kind of huge sectarian strife there. More and more it looks like that, does it not?
Yes. And it probably will be at the same time blamed.
It's not about the United States, it's about the competition for power.
No, but wait. But the people who will be striving against each other, and you're right, competition for power, will at the same time be blaming the United States for creating the circumstances.
By overthrowing Saddam Hussein?
Yes, in which one side can blow up the other. You know, a Shiite procession can be attacked, Sunni worshippers can be blown up, and so forth. Their sense is America came in and destroyed us. And now these volatile forces are at work, and this is part of the legacy that was bequeathed to us in the name of democracy. Let's have no illusion about that.
好，视频看完是不是很震撼？布热津斯基早在10几年前就预言了今天的一切。最后几分钟，我来梳理几条隐藏的暗线，再说一点我自己的感受。第一，布热津斯基虽然没有明说，但他其实在问一个非常政治不正确的问题：为什么美国对朝鲜和伊朗如此双标？你看他说的很直接，苏联有和，美国忍了；中国有和，美国也忍了；即便是小小的朝鲜半岛，美国也忍了。那么为什么偏偏对伊朗就是忍不了呢？因为伊朗是软柿子吗？当然不是。布热津斯基没有直接回答，但潜台词就是因为伊朗挡了以色列的中东霸权之路。而美国的悲剧就在于，他的中东政策早已被以色列绑架，一旦以色列发动袭击，正面挨枪子的是美国，付出代价的也是美国。第二点，布热津斯基也没有故意明说，就是有核的伊朗可能比无核的伊朗更加安全。这个角度非常刁钻啊。他说，伊朗追求的不是核弹，而是像日本一样拥有潜在的核能力。日本拥有完整的核技术链条，1个月内就能造出完整的核弹。但日本不造，为什么？因为没有必要。一方面，美国会保护它；另外一方面，它只要保留了这个能力，就足以威慑周边的其他国家。那伊朗呢？它的周围，巴基斯坦、以色列都是拥核国家，它夹在中间。如果你是伊朗，你会怎么想呢？所以布热津斯基其实是想说，如果你让伊朗保留了潜在的核能力，给了伊朗安全感，它反而不需要造出真正的核武器。第三点， 阿拉伯之春以及全球政治力量觉醒。西方人以为那是什么民主的胜利，但布热津斯基看得非常透，这根本不是什么民主，而是旧系统的崩溃。以前的大国博弈是精英跟精英玩，老百姓只是背景板，是顺从的棋子。但互联网把这个世界颠覆了，系统直接升级到了民粹 2.0 版本，棋子活了，而且手里拿着燃烧瓶。突尼斯人推翻本阿里，不是想变成法国第二；埃及人赶走穆巴拉克，不是要给华盛顿交民主答卷，是中东人长期压抑之下的反弹。他们受够了自己的命运被外人拿捏，受够了精英阶层做美国的提线木偶。美国以前玩的帝国主义那一套，收买军阀，扶持代理人，划分势力范围，放在100年前可能还管用，放在21世纪的今天，面对几亿个被互联网唤醒且极度敏感追求自尊的中东年轻人，这套控制术失效了。所以阿拉伯之春开启的根本不是什么民主化浪潮，而是全球性的去依附化运动。布热津斯基其实在警告，当所有人都变得政治敏感时，美国的霸权就玩不转了，因为霸权需要是顺从的羊，而不是清醒的人。结果就是美国在阿拉伯之春里既丢失了忠实的走狗，也没有赢得民心，两头不是人，这才是美国霸权崩塌真正的开始。而西方人还在自我感动地认为这是民主的胜利，真的非常搞笑。第4点，布热津斯基在这段访谈里说了一句非常耐人寻味的话：巴勒斯坦人在不久的将来将面临悲惨的命运。这一点其实我们已经看到了，而从长远来看，以色列也将面临极其危险的命运。布热津斯基没有明说，但他的意思是，嘴上说2国方案，其实从来都只有1国方案，而1国方案的结局就是以色列人其实是在自掘坟墓。因为从约旦河西岸到地中海之间，阿拉伯人口的数量已经马上要超过犹太人了。如果长期维持现状，以色列人只有2种选择：一，要么放弃做民主国家，变成赤裸裸的种族隔离政权；二，要么给巴勒斯坦人投票权，然后被人数更多的阿拉伯人投票变成穆斯林国家，直接把犹太国家属性干没了。布热津斯基说的正是这种结构性的自杀。当美国这个唯一能施压达成2国方案的外部力量消失以后，以色列将在生理意义上被人口统计学所淹没。以前的以色列为什么能横着走？因为美国压住了沙特，管住了埃及，锁死了伊朗，所以以色列的安全感其实建立在美国在中东的霸权之上的。但布热津斯基看透了以色列的战略短视，因为他知道美国注定要离开，而且走的时候可能连声招呼都不会打。一旦美国撤军断供，以色列人会发现自己被困在一个充满敌意、人口爆炸、核武扩散，而且不再忌惮他的中东。这就是他眼中极其危险的命运。以色列人没有输掉一场战争，而是在赢得所有战役之后，发现自己没有未来。好了，这期视频就到这里了。制作视频不易，如果您觉得做得不错，感谢您动动手指，一键3连。如果您有更多的想法或者建议，也可以在评论区告诉我，我都会看见。我们下期见。